Are you tired of being blinded by the light of the sun when it comes to looking at stuff in the water? Well, Costa sunglasses help with that. And, I'll be honest, it really does help. And I'm someone who absolutely loves just to look at like fish swimming around in the water. And the moment I put a pair of Costas on with polarized lenses, I can see straight through the water and kind of get a glimpse of what I'm looking at. They use 580 lens technology that enhances comfort and color, brings out beauty, and helps you stay out on the water longer. But if you're not a fisherman or fisherwoman, they're just great sunglasses for anything. Glare off the snow, glare in the mountains off rivers, as well as just comfortable sunglasses to wear all the time. So if you want to be able to stay out there longer, you're going to need a good pair of sunglasses. We recommend Costas. Go to costassunglasses.com to learn more so you can keep seeing what's out there.
And they rooted through the tablets one by one and found these painkillers, ordinary painkillers, which you can get over the counter here in the UK, called cocodamol. And unbeknown to me, they were classed in Uzbekistan as an illegal narcotic. And so from that moment on, I was in their eyes an illegal drug smuggler.
This is the Adventure Sports Podcast, trying to help you find adventure every day in any stage of life. You're going to hear from explorers, adventurers, business owners, and anyone living their life a little more out of the box than usual. Hey, I hope you're having a good week so far. Last Friday we listened to Oli France talk about some of his guiding experiences in really hostile environments, which was crazy to me. But he's been on the show before, episode 330, where he talks about we mentioned it a little bit in the most recent episode, but I just wanted to do a flashback and share with it because this episode is with Kurt, and he focuses 100% on his experience of literally doing this trip right in the middle of a home renovation right before he got married for 108 days along the spine of Asia, climbing mountains all over the place. What an epic adventure, and I hope you enjoy. Today's episode is brought to us by Athletic Brewing, the makers of just incredible non-alcoholic beer. If you love the taste of beer, but you're committed to either sobriety or getting fit, give them a shot. It's great stuff, and you get 15% off using the code ADVENTURE. Also, if you need a good coffee option while you travel, or if you need something convenient, check out CS Instant Coffee. They're huge fans of the show, and they are giving our listeners 20% off at csinstant.coffee. And here's the episode.
Hi, friends. Thank you again for listening to the Adventure Sports Podcast. The guest that I have for you today is a traveler, an adventurer, a writer, a public speaker, a photographer, a British adventurer. We're glad to have Oli France with us. Oli is here to talk about a lot of his adventures, but especially one where he traveled from Hong Kong to Istanbul solo. It took him 4 months. He went through 11 countries. He traveled over the spine of Asia. He climbed 14 mountains in winter, and the book is called The Trail of the Mountain Folk. So, Oli, welcome to the program.
Hi, Kurt. It's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
You bet. It's our pleasure. Man, it sounds like an amazing adventure, and it's not just about travel. It's about mountaineering in the wintertime as well. I'm excited to dive into those details, but before we do, we got to get the backstory a little bit. So,
all right.
Where are you in UK?
So I'm based up in a town of Wigan in the north of the UK. Born and bred here, and it's a northern industrial town and quite away from the mountains, actually. So my childhood was mainly spent playing conventional sports, football and rugby. We had a very good rugby team, and then around about the age of 16, 17, I discovered climbing, and I've never really looked back since over the last decade.
Wow. Well, you have a bachelor's degree in outdoor leadership as well. Were you planning for a career in adventure?
Absolutely not. I mean, in my childhood, I really had no no concept of the outdoor world whatsoever. It was completely alien to me. And as I mentioned, I first went climbing at around about the age of 16. And it was that trip, actually, which really just fostered an immediate love for the outdoors and the adventurous nature of it, the adrenaline you can get from it. And it was that one experience that led me to sign up to a 3-year university degree studying outdoor leadership. It was that impactful for me.
Did you pursue a career outside of expeditions and adventure, and then eventually come back to it? Tell us that story.
Well, I went straight from college into university and studied my degree, and I was doing lots of bits of travel in between. I went and worked in America at a sports camp. I traveled around in Morocco and taught in Lebanon and volunteered in Uganda, and then went and worked in Australia for a year. And I came back, and as often happens with these travels, I didn't have so much money left, so I realised I needed to get a job, and just so happened to get a job selling kitchens, which is a little different to the
great
career I'm pursuing right now. Yeah, so I did that for 2 years, and don't get me wrong, a job like that has its perks. You get a steady wage and all those things, but the more I went into that career, I just had this urge inside me to get back to what I was really passionate about, and to try and turn my life around and dedicate it back to adventure. And it was 2 years in, and I decided, without anything lined up whatsoever, to quit my job and embark on a big expedition. And it's this Asian trip, which is what I set out to complete. And I can go into a little more detail of what my objectives were for that.
Well, we will. But before we do, let's get a little more information about what adventure is to you. So I see that on your website here, you've traveled over 50 countries. So you've done a lot of traveling. Yeah. To you, is adventure about traveling, or is it about climbing mountains, or what other adventure sports do you enjoy?
Well, I do like to say that adventure does not have to be overseas. It does not have to be far-fetched. And adventure can absolutely be found in your own backyard. And I'm a huge proponent of that. I make the conscious effort, even when I'm at home in my industrial town, to head out to the nearby fields and forests, and at least go for a run, go for a trail run, go for a walk with my wife. Just get out there, because I think adventure is so accessible, and in some ways adventure can be a scary word for people. They hear it and they think you need to be a seasoned expeditionist, you need to be a man of the mountains, but I wouldn't consider myself any of those things. So adventure for me is stepping beyond your own personal boundaries and breaking out of your comfort zone a little, trying something new, maybe seeking out a little adrenaline rush from either an outdoor activity or just going exploring nature in some way.
Well, cool. Oli, let's dive into your trip. I would like to hear the details of that. I don't know many people who have traveled in that part of the world. To me, it's just like a big unknown, and I can't even visualize your route. And so, fill us in. You started in Hong Kong and you went to Istanbul, so all the way to Turkey, and that means you crossed all the stands, right?
I did, yes.
Okay, so what was that route?
Well, almost all the stands. So the route was spending many years looking at maps, which really selected this route for me. And if you look at a topographical map of Asia, you'll notice an almost continuous spine of mountains which stretches from Southeast Asia down near Laos, Vietnam and Burma, and then up through the Tibetan Plateau, and then you've got the Pamirs of Afghanistan, the Tian Shan of Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan, and they wind down through Iran and up through the Caucasus of Azerbaijan, Armenia, and then the mountains of Turkey and towards Istanbul. And it was looking at this chain of mountains, which it just spawned this question in my mind. Would it be possible to travel overland through all these mountain ranges by any means whatsoever, and climb at least one mountain in each country.
Mm.
And so that was the kind of wild goal I set myself. And so I decided to start off in Hong Kong and moved quickly into Vietnam, which is the mountains there are jungle clad, absolutely beautiful, pristine, home to wonderful, colourful hill tribes who are really born and bred in the mountains, very tough, hardy folk, and that's where my journey began.
You really did go through a lot of places that I don't think are heavily traveled.
Yes, I certainly did. Yeah, places like Central Asia, like you said, it is somewhat of a geographical black hole. Much of it was under the rule of the Soviet Union until the mid-90s, and then suddenly, from nowhere, 5 countries appeared. Them being Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan, which constitute Central Asia. And it was my intention to travel all the way through those 5 countries. And it was here where I had some of my more interesting challenges, which included getting detained for several days, being spied upon, being held at borders, being skirted by avalanches, being trapped in blizzards, and immense amount of challenges as I was tackling some very remote mountains in the middle of winter and really pushing myself to my absolute limits in those countries.
So when you set out on the trip, did you expect these sorts of challenges?
Well, the reality is probably not. It was from the outset. I knew that I was taking a conscious step into the unknown. As you say, these countries aren't known about so much, and although you hear things from fellow travellers about perhaps problems with police, for instance, on the people side, and then you certainly hear tales of daring adventures in the mountains in these regions. But certainly the encounters that I had and the experiences I had were far more powerful, far more dangerous, far more scary at times than I ever could have imagined.
So logistically, when you decided to take this trip, did you do a lot of planning? Did you have all your visas in advance and that sort of thing?
Well, you may perhaps expect me to say yes, but honestly, no. I had a destination which was Istanbul, which lay 8,000 miles away from Hong Kong. I had no guidebooks. I had no set route at the time I set off. I had my Chinese visa, but that was all. And I just had I had my destination, but everything else was sort of left up to chance and opportunity, which kind of sounds crazy, but I think it was that having that ability to be flexible, to move, to change direction, to go with the flow, to meet people and get advice and go to one place rather than another, to wing it in a certain way and allow people to guide your journey. I wanted that to happen. I didn't want to follow a commonly trodden route that you might find in a guidebook. I wanted sort of people to guide my way, if that makes sense.
It does, and I think it's a wonderful way to travel. It would be so great. I mean,
yeah.
I've interviewed a lot of travelers, a lot of adventurers, and it starts out, I've said this on the show before, but it always starts out that it's about this adventure, and then by the end, it turns into it's really about the people I encountered along the way. It was both, right? But people always seem to be the focus. In the end, that's what makes people go, wow, the people were so cool. And
absolutely
choosing in advance to let the local people kind of guide your steps, man, that makes perfect sense. To me, that is probably the best way to travel if you can do it.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree. And I think solo travel actually lends itself to that because you're forced to problem solve on your own and expose yourself to other people, rather than being sort of insular as you might be in a team or in a group of people. You need to ask other people for help. You need to find suggestions. you need to seek advice. And it's being a solo traveller, which I think, although frightening and scary at first, perhaps, it is so liberating once you realise that we're all humans and we're all willing to help each other, in times of need. And I was certainly in some times of need along my journey.
Sure. Well, let's dive into that just a little bit. You mentioned earlier that you took a conscious step into the unknown, and I love how you said that. What were the scary parts of this? There aren't a lot of people that will just dive into something that's that unknown without a little bit more information and planning. Was there something that you found particularly challenging or compelling or scary about the way that you approach this?
Yeah, I mean, there were. I can pick out specific situations where because you are sort of off the beaten track, certain things happen which you could never have anticipated, and because you've not sought out research, you've not done your research on places, you're not so clued up as to what to expect. And I can give an example of that if you'd like to hear it. It's probably one of the standout tales from my journey. If I could share that.
Yeah, let's hear it.
All right. So I was down in the south of Tajikistan, which lies just to the north of Afghanistan, and it's an absolutely beautiful country. I just celebrated the Persian New Year, and I've been off to a really remote village called Shirken, in which I found, with the help of some locals, some dinosaur footprints which were marked on a cliff face and discovered in the 60s by a Russian archaeologist. And from there, my next step was to move towards Uzbekistan. And I know some of these countries may be unfamiliar to some of your listeners, but Uzbekistan is known generally as a fairly repressive country in which there's not so much freedom of speech. There's quite a tight grip on the country there, unfortunately. And as I passed travellers on the way, I heard tales that you may well be watched once you go to this country, and your rights may not be looked after as they might in the Western world. And so I headed towards the Uzbek border in a very remote part of Central Asia, between Dushanbe, the capital of Tajikistan, and a mountainous corner of Uzbekistan. And I headed there late at night, and it was dark, and it's a very, very quiet border post. And I crossed over the Tajik border. He tried to seek a bribe out of me. I refused and managed to get over into no man's land. And I was greeted on the Uzbek side by a pristinely attired officer wearing a green suit, green hat, in his perfectly white room. And he gave me a really excellent welcome and showed me through to the next door. And I thought, great, I'm in Uzbekistan. I don't know what the problem was. But as I go through into this room, it's this big, bright, white, almost medical-looking room. And there's a desk with a man sat behind it and tapping away on a computer, and another stern officer staring at me. And it's only me there at this time crossing the border. And he points to my bag and he points to the table. And so I throw it down, and he asks for my laptop, my phone, my hard drive, my cameras, all of these things which I've been carrying with me, all my electronic goods. And they start going through all the files on my camera, all the various things on my laptop, and I'm kind of thinking, what on earth's going on here?
Wow.
And he takes me for a search through every item in my bag. And this process takes maybe about an hour. And I think, okay, yeah, they've just about done everything now. I'm going to be fine. But the last thing they checked was a medical kit which I had in my pack. And they routed through the tablets one by one and found these painkillers, ordinary painkillers, which you can get over the counter here in the UK, called cocodamol. And unbeknown to me, they were classed in Uzbekistan as an illegal narcotic. So from that moment on, I was in their eyes an illegal drug smuggler. And I was hauled up to an interrogation room. A 4-hour interrogation ensued. I was asked to sign all kinds of documents, all written in Russian. The English they had was very poor, so we had trouble communicating. And at the end of all this, it was about midnight, and they said, okay, you need to sign these papers. I'm kind of thinking, there's no way I'm signing these papers. I have no idea what they said. I said, no, I'm not going to sign them. I'm going to wait until the morning. They said, okay, we'll put you in this in this room overnight, which had basically only a bed in it. And I came up with a plan overnight. I thought, right, I'll ring the British Embassy in the morning. They'll save me. So I called them up. This is a Friday morning in late March, and I got an immediate answer phone message. Hello, it's Good Friday, and we will be closed until next Tuesday. Our apologies for any inconvenience. And the Uzbeks snatched the phone out of my hands, and that was me all on my own again. And what ensued was 4 days detained in the town of Termez on the Afghan border. After which I was made to pay a hefty fine and allowed to go on my way. So that was some experience, yeah.
What did you go through during those 4 days? Did you begin to think that you might be stuck there for good?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when they took me down to Termez on the border, they introduced me to an interpreter, and they were saying there's a very good chance you could go to prison here. I was absolutely terrified. I was due to get married in 4 months' time, and I was just thinking, I'm going to be stuck in this hellhole. How on earth am I going to get out? And they basically put me under house arrest in a very dingy hotel in the middle of the city, and sort of there was one particular soldier or officer who returned to the room each day and was just the most cruel-minded person, just subjecting me to constant sort of mental anguish, really. And I couldn't shake him off, and he knew that I was just in the palm of his hands. He had my passport. There was no way out for me at that point, and he insisted that once I'd agreed that I would pay a fine rather than go to jail. Once I'd agreed on that, he said, "Okay, then Oliver, you must leave the very next day. You must leave Uzbekistan and go back to your country." And for a moment there, I actually agreed with him and thought, you know what, I'm about halfway through this trip. Maybe I should just go home. I'm putting my family through all this anguish because of these troubles. Maybe I should just go home. But then this inner voice just spoke to me, which is the same voice which made me come on this journey, which made me realize that, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to do something really great. And if you give up just because of something like this, then, you could regret it for the rest of your life. And so I said goodbye to this officer once I'd been let out after paying my fine, and I caught a taxi straight up to the mountains and went and climbed one the next day in Uzbekistan.
So they released you expecting that you're going to run away, and instead you just went right on in.
I did. Yeah. That story in particular has raised a few eyebrows, but and I was very much kind of stepping further into the unknown at that point, and maybe it was a moment of madness, I don't know, but ultimately looking back, I'm glad that I carried on with my journey rather than hitting the airport and flying home.
So we have to hear how things turned out when you finally decided it was time to exit Uzbekistan.
Well,
what happened?
I mean, after heading over to the mountains, it wasn't plain sailing at all. That very first night, I found a small cafe in this tiny mountainous village, and there's no Wi-Fi, no internet access. So, unfortunately, I was still cut off from my family. They still believed I was being held, and they're worrying back in the UK. And at this point, knowing that I'm cut off, I'm thinking, this is just stupid. Why am I putting through this? And I was sat up in the cafe, sort of wondering if I've made the wrong decision. And two policemen come in and they spot me instantly. And I just found it strange how they knew I was there. And they pulled me outside, checked through my passport and my papers, and just kind of looked me up and down, but then sent me on my way. And I met some local guys that night as well. And we drove up to a viewpoint over the town, and we were sort of listening to music, and I just thought, wow, this is brilliant. I've met some local people who have been incredibly kind to me. But then, sure enough, about half an hour later, another police car rolls up and orders me back to my hotel at once. It was quite late at that point. But the next day I woke up, I went and climbed a mountain. But on getting back, again, late in the evening, perhaps spookily, most spookily of all, as I walked back to my hotel and it was pitch black, I saw the police car parked up just around the corner from the hotel and watched as the policeman got out of his car, walked along the front of the hotel, stood up against the window and spied through it for about 10 seconds. And I knew there was nobody in that room because it was my bedroom. And he was consciously spying on me, or at least attempting to spy on me, without knowing, of course, I was watching him from the shadows of the road. And so once he'd gone away, I dashed into my room, put a blanket over the window so that nobody could see through, and I got the hell out of there the next morning at about 5 a.m.
I bet you slept really well that night.
Oh, it's not my best night's sleep, no. No. So yeah, the next day it turned into a bit of a James Bond adventure. I was traveling from town to town across Uzbekistan. I covered about 400 miles, swapping taxis in every town to reach the city of Bukhara, and believe that I'd hopefully by now evaded the watchful eye of the state. At that point, my next planned move was to travel down into Turkmenistan, which actually has an even worse reputation than Uzbekistan.
Oh no!
Yeah, but perhaps by some miracle, my visa didn't come through for Turkmenistan, and I was basically, that option was taken out of my hands to travel south, and so I had no choice but to get out of Uzbekistan through the north and back into the relative peacefulness of Kazakhstan, fortunately without any more problems.
So we want to thank our sponsor, Athletic Brewing, for promoting a healthy lifestyle through making some of the world's best non-alcoholic craft beer. They make excellent tasting NA for healthy, active, modern adults. They use certified all-organic grains, and each can of non-alcoholic beer is only between 50 and 70 calories. They have IPA, golden ale, stouts, and tons of seasonal offerings. And recently, they actually just took home the gold medal at the U.S. Open Beer Championships for their double hop IPA. If you would like to get your hands on some, you can save 15% by using the code ADVENTURE at athleticbrewing.com. Athletic Brewing, the best tasting way to keep your promises. And I also want to thank our sponsor, CS Instant Coffee, for making this show happen. They make 100% Arabica instant coffee. They use compostable packaging, and each package makes about 20 ounces of coffee. So I'll take one of those with me on an overnight trip, and it makes 2 pretty good-sized cups of coffee. And it's an awesome feeling knowing I can just throw that in my backpack, find some hot water, and I'm good to go. Save 20% by using the code ADVENTURE at csinstant.coffee.
In the end, are you glad that you stayed in Uzbekistan, or would you have rather have just bypassed it somehow?
Well, I'm alive, and it's a good story. So, yeah. I mean, I'm glad it's happened. Why not? Hey, it's character building. Let's call it that.
Well, I have to just candidly admit, the idea of traveling sounds wonderful. The idea of climbing mountains sounds wonderful. The idea of meeting the local people sounds wonderful. The idea of dealing with the authorities doesn't sound wonderful at all.
Yes, that was not the most pleasant part of the trip. However, I will say that all the other amazing moments really made it worth it.
So what was next after Uzbekistan?
After Uzbekistan, I found myself in Kazakhstan, and from there travelled across to the Caucasus region, which constitutes of Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia. 3 really fascinating countries in their own right, which quite similar to much of Central Asia, was under Soviet rule for decades, and since then has endured kind of civil unrest and these kinds of problems. But what's left is a really undiscovered part of Asia, which absolutely fascinated me at once. You've got Azerbaijan, which sits on the coast of the Caspian Sea. It's got immense oil wealth, and the city Baku is called the Dubai of the Caucasus. It's an absolutely stunning place. And then you've got these incredible, untouched white mountains, which line the border between the Caucasus countries and southern part of Russia. And so that was my next target, to go and explore those.
That area has always been kind of interest to me. And it might have something to do with the Caucasus, right? Or Georgia having the reputation for the most oldest people in the world living there, right?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
And did you learn anything about that when you were there?
Well, if my experiences are ever anything to go by, we all need to drink a lot more vodka in order to reach that old age. Because every time I was invited into one of the hospitable Georgians' homes, and they are the most hospitable people, I was inevitably plied with countless glasses of vodka. So perhaps that's their magic trick. Who knows?
Well, I had heard it might be red wine, but don't know.
Oh, the red wine is also excellent. Yeah, I was forced to sample that on many occasions.
And twist your arm, right?
Yeah, well, a little bit, yeah.
Well, it sounds so fascinating. You know, I heard a study once. No one knows really why it is that the people in that region tend to live so long, I don't think, but I did hear of a study once that was fascinating. It was a long-term study where they studied people's lives and how, especially people that have lived a long time, and they looked for some common element. Was it diet? Was it a stress level? You know, was it exercise? What was it that allowed these people to live so long? And this particular study came back with the most surprising result. It was not diet. Okay. It was not exercise. It was not stress. What it was joy. They found that the people that lived the longest were the ones that enjoyed life the most. And the conclusion was, go ahead and eat something, even if it's not that great for you, but make sure you really enjoy it when you do. Celebrate life to the fullest. Have friends, laugh a lot, and you'll live long. And I thought, well, I love that outcome. I don't know if it's medically sound, but it sounds great. So were the people in Georgia very joyful?
They absolutely were. It was quite stunning, actually. As I mentioned, I was invited into people's homes, you know, without asking whatsoever. You meet somebody in the street, and they pull you through the front door, and 5 minutes later, you'd be sat around a table, you know, getting to know each other. But in the traditional meals, and I was very lucky to experience one of these high up in the Caucasus in a beautiful little town of Gudaury, where some Georgian ski tourists had just returned from 7 days in the mountains, and I was traipsing through this village trying to find a place to stay. And this was the only place left with the lights on, because it was very late in the ski season and everyone else had shut up. So I knocked on this door, which was advertised as a hostel, although the sign had been pulled down. And they said, we are actually closed, but you know what? This is Georgia. Welcome on in. And it was just the most fascinating evening. The evening meal constituted of about 2 hours of joyful speeches and belly laughter and singing after dinner, and then an open fire outside and dancing. Like you say, actually, it was really pure joy for life, and it's just so invigorating to be in that setting.
Wow, I think that those of us in the West need to take notes right now.
I absolutely agree. Yeah,
that's amazing to me.
Yeah.
Why is it that they have the freedom to celebrate life and we have the freedom to celebrate life? But it sounds like, at least my impression is, they're doing a better job of it. What do we need to do to be more like that?
I think a lot of it is simplicity, actually. From my point of view, it's leading as simple a life as possible, and detaching yourself from time to time. You don't have to do it always, but detaching yourself from time to time from the modern world, from phones and emails and stresses and things like that. And I'm not suggesting you go on a big adventure like I did, but just get outside, walk in the mountains. And I think that is hugely stress relieving. To have nothing with you whatsoever but a pair of walking boots and a couple of friends. I think it is simplicity which really brings about true happiness.
Yeah, I think you're onto something there as well. Let's go back to the beginning of the trip. You mentioned earlier that you had the inner voice that told you to go. And I'd like to hear more about your motivations for doing the trip. What gave you the idea? You mentioned you saw the mountains, that went through that part of Asia. But was that what planted the seed? And what was it that finally, in the end, made you step out the door and make it happen?
So I guess the motivations were there were more than one, really. Partly it was a big part of it was setting myself such a outlandish challenge that it would perhaps shape my future, perhaps shape my future life. I knew that if I was to quit my job and go on a 1 week trip around Europe, it wouldn't quite be so life changing. I knew that it needed to be so extreme, so unusual, so challenging that I would have to evolve as a person to actually reach my endpoint. And so as I added up this journey and looked at it in more detail, I just thought it's so perfect. It's so simple. Travel the length of Asia across the mountainous spine and get to the end, and yet it's so challenging. And once I'd settled on that, it was really there was no doubt in my mind that I was at least going to get to the start point, and everything else thereafter was really left to chance. However, I did have this underlying compulsion to get to the end, knowing that if I didn't, then I could well return back home, back at square one. And so I absolutely had this determination to succeed despite the many challenges I faced.
Well, what do you think the biggest obstacles were to getting started on the trip? Let's go there for just a minute.
Okay. I think it was perhaps convincing, although it was a solo journey, it's convincing other people to have belief in you in some way, and that includes kind of friends and family who I told them this plan, and they kind of looked at me as though I was completely mad, probably justifiably, but it was accepting in my own mind as well that this was achievable. And there was a narrative which I kept repeating in my mind as I went through this journey. It's that the only thing that can actually stop you, it's not the avalanches, it's not the cold weather, it's not the chance of arrest or persecution from authorities. The only thing that can really stop you from getting to the end point is yourself. If you can force yourself to keep on overcoming these goals as you go along, then really success is in your own hands, and on a journey like this. And I don't quite know. I do look back now, and I don't know if I could go and do that journey again. But for some reason, I think it was perhaps 2 years spent selling kitchens, living a life which I wasn't really enjoying. But I just felt this absolute compulsion to complete this journey, which I don't know if it was a fleeting part of my own existence, or if I could harness that again and do another trip just as grand. But it was like an inner compulsion, which is kind of hard to describe and may well sound kind of crazy, but that's the best I can do.
No, I think I get that. I think that many people feel that tug, that says life's got to have bigger experiences and there's something out there. But I also keyed in on one thing that you said. You said you took off on a journey that you knew would have to change you, that you wouldn't be the same person at the end that you were at the beginning. and you chose that journey, that's where a lot of people stop. That's scary to people,
Yeah.
you know? So what
Yeah.
kind of a change were you looking for?
Well, I guess I'd had a taste of it in previous journeys previous little adventures I'd been on, knowing that when you do force yourself out of your comfort zone, you do grow as a person. And what I was hoping for myself is that I would realize that if I could actually complete this crazy journey that I challenged myself with, then, what could I do? So I did come back with a mindset that actually anything is kind of possible now. If I put my mind to it as much as I managed to put my mind to this, then I can achieve it. And I think it comes down basically to having goals, setting yourself achievable goals, and that's something I've absolutely continued to do ever since this expedition. I've set myself regular incremental goals to try and evolve as a person, and I think it's great to try something new every single day and to challenge yourself every single day. And if you do that, if you do it over and over again, then it becomes normal to you. You become competent and you become confident in that whatever it might be.
So life itself becomes the adventure.
Absolutely.
That's really cool, man. Really cool. Well, you also set out as a part of your objectives to climb at least one mountain in each of these countries. And you climbed mountains in wintertime. Give us a rundown of that.
Yeah, I mean, that was perhaps the cause for some of the people, as I mentioned, to raise their eyebrows about my trip. Well, okay, I understand you going, but you do know that it's winter, don't you? But despite those concerns, I was there, and it was full winter conditions, and we're kind of talking minus. Well, it's Fahrenheit over there, isn't it? But very cold, very very cold in Tibet certainly, and across Central Asia, and so I did face a lot of challenges associated with mountains off the beaten track in winter conditions, and certainly. Probably Kyrgyzstan stands out the most in my mind, if I could maybe describe that.
Oh yeah, go for it.
Experience. So I'd just arrived in the city of Bishkek, which is the capital of Kyrgyzstan, and just to the south of the city, about an hour away, is the Alatoy Mountains, which are a fantastically rugged mountain range. And I've been tracking the weather closely because I knew that a storm was coming in. And I had local advice saying that that really, people don't go to these mountains in the winter time. But still, my objective was set. I'd picked out a map through no real research, just purely because it looked appealing on the contours on my map. And so I settled that I was going to climb this mountain called Komsomolets, which is just about 4,000 meters, about 4,050 meters, I believe. And so I hiked up there from the start point. There's no trail whatsoever. Absolutely, nobody around. The mountains really are deserted. And it was a long slog up a scree slope. And the altitude was just starting to grip me. And I finally reached 4,000 meters. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to have to wait here and spend the night, and I'll reach the summit in the morning. So I set up camp on a snowy ridge in the middle of nowhere in Kyrgyzstan. And overnight, the conditions suddenly changed. The temperature dropped to around minus 15, and this immense blizzard blew in from the south. And I was sleeping in nothing but a sleeping bag and like a bivvy bag. So I had my face exposed to the conditions.
Oh boy!
Because I was traveling ultralight. I had no tent whatsoever. There's blizzard coming in. There's snow whizzing against my face, and I'm trying to shelter behind my bag. And morning comes around. I'm dying for morning to come around because it's absolutely freezing and can barely feel my feet. All my food is frozen solid, And despite putting my water bottles inside my sleeping bag with me, they too have frozen. And that was absolutely one of those distinct moments where I really had to ask myself, when I got up that morning, how much do I want it? How much do I want to strap on my frozen boots and lift up my heavy pack and turn into the blizzard and on up the mountain to the summit? And again, I came back to that thing where, I do believe that I can get to the end. I can get to the summit. I don't have to let things like the altitude and the snow and the cold stop me if I really believe that I can do it. And so I did do exactly that. I maybe did star jumps for about 20 minutes to warm my feet back up, and then I raced up to the summit and swiftly back down. And that was absolutely one of the most memorable mountains. And I remember actually I got to the bottom and I thought, I got back to the trailhead where there's a couple of buildings, but no real people. And I kind of thought that was the end of my challenge. And then reminded myself that actually the capital city where I come from was 40 miles away and I had no way of getting back. So I kind of looked the road up and down and then set off. Fortunately, after a couple of hours walking, I managed to flag down a passing car, and the family were very kindly took me back and shared chocolates with me. And I remember one quote, the mother of this family said, when I told them about my journey, she said, "Okay, but while you were sleeping in your sleeping bag, weren't you worried about eagles pecking your face?" And, I have to say that was never a concern amongst everything else.
That's the first I've ever heard of that. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
So I wonder if that's a thing there.
Maybe, yeah.
That's funny. Well, that's amazing. So you said -15, which in Fahrenheit is around 0, wind howling, snow plastering your face, miserable conditions. Did you worry about your safety? Did you start to say, this could be dangerous?
It was kind of on the edge. It was really. I mean, by the time morning came around and I was to start moving, I could really hardly feel my feet. There was an immense burning pain in both of them. And despite wearing 2 pairs of socks and a good winter sleeping bag, I was quite concerned about my feet, especially. But it was I just, knowing that I was completely alone up there and knowing that I really had no chance of anybody coming to my help. I didn't even have signal on my phone. Was the kick up the backside to get out of the sleeping bag and start moving again, because only I could get myself out of that situation. Which, yeah, is again kind of crazy, but that was reason enough for me to keep moving.
Well, and keep moving you have to in those situations. You don't really have another choice.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's almost when your survival instinct kicks in.
So I have to ask the question, because I know some listeners are sitting out there saying, "What? Why? Why would you do such a thing? Is it worth it?" There's got to be some motivation besides just testing yourself.
Yeah. I think really what it comes down to, and I don't want to give the wrong idea about people's life's choices, but for me, I just felt that I was just fed up with the mundanity of an ordinary life, and and having tasted travel and adventure in the outdoors, I just craved that adrenaline so much. And I think part of that was kind of being fed up in my job, knowing that there's more to life than this. And perhaps I'd got a bit of a disregard for my own existence it sounds dramatic, and perhaps that's what really compelled me to take such big risks along the way. It was not really enjoying the way that my life was turning out, and knowing that I needed this adrenaline kick, this adventure, this life-lifting experience, and again, that was one of the key driving points right throughout the expedition.
Well, now you're done. You've done it. How did it change you?
Well, it really has been a life-changing experience. Since then, I've not gone back to the 9 to 5 grind. I've become qualified as a British mountain leader, and I now work as an expedition leader, taking trips to various places around the world. I led a trip to Malawi in the summer, and I'm heading back to Africa in about a week, leading a tour to Rwanda, Burundi, and the Congo. And I've got around 6 or 7 expeditions lined up for next year. And so, I feel like that really, the way that things have turned out has justified in entirety deciding to go on that expedition and deciding to push myself so hard, because I am truly a changed person for it, and it really has changed my life. I can't envisage a time when I will go back to selling kitchens, that's for sure.
I get it. I really do. My experiences doing really challenging mountaineering in the wintertime or winter camping or, extended backpacking trips, climbing 14ers, whatever it is, those challenges have become part of who I am. And I see myself now in light of those, and I think that's what happens when we go out and have these adventures, is we learn so much about ourselves, and it gives us courage, if nothing else, to reach for those goals that you talk about, to try to build a life that is meaningful in its own way for us. Isn't that what it's about?
Yeah, absolutely agree. And as you say, it's just the small incremental goals. If you I hadn't tried climbing until I was 16, 17. You've got kids going climbing at the age of 6, 7 now, and so another message which perhaps I think is really important is that it really is never too late to make that change. If you're not happy with the way your life is going, always remember that the next day, tomorrow is the first day of the rest of your life. What's happened has happened, but it's never too late to make a positive change and go out and seek whatever you want in life. It really is never too late to do that.
Word. I'm with you, man. That is so rich. Yeah. And, some people might say, isn't life hard enough without adding all that in? And I stop and say, no, you don't get it. It's all that being added in that makes life less difficult.
100%. I absolutely agree. Absolutely agree.
Well, we have to talk about your book. So, man, we just got a couple of high points from your trip, but you've written a whole book about it. Again, the name of the book is The Trail of the Mountain Folk. And I guess for starters, How can people find your book? Let's make sure that people know where they can get it.
So it's available on Amazon, but probably the best way to get a direct link is to head onto my website, which is oliverfrance.com, and from there you can hit a link straight to my book and also read the blurb, the synopsis. And so the book covers the full journey with lots more stories crammed in right across the mountains, talking about my experiences and the way it's impacted me and the challenges I've faced, and also lots of the good times. The Trail of the Mountain Folk. And if you head to oliverfrance.com, that's where you'll find it.
Well, do you have a favorite passage that you would share with us?
Yeah, I've come up with something which I don't think we've touched on in this conversation. So, just to set it up, this is just as I was attempting to sneak my way into a Tibetan village in the middle of winter when I knew that a festival was approaching, despite the watchful eye of the state. So, I'll take it away from here. 8 hours northwest of Chengdu lies the Tibetan frontier town of Zhoij, which sits on a windswept plateau at 3,500 meters. I had entered a bleak and unforgiving landscape. A frozen gale whisked across the tablelands, pushing the temperature towards a twilight low of -20. Tibetan nomads braved the weather and wandered the deserted streets, attired in thick yak wool tubas, traditional coats. I made straight for the bus ticket office, a hole in a ramshackle hut. Tashi Dalek, Hello. Langmusi, tomorrow. The young lady behind the desk looked shy and uncertain. She turned to her colleague and they spoke briefly. The lady translated a message on her phone, then showed me the screen. No bus tomorrow. I smiled at myself. I ought to have expected this. I tried again. Langmusi, tomorrow, bus. I pointed at a bus. I know, I tapped my head. Then I tapped my watch and held up 7 fingers to indicate the time of its departure. Tomorrow. Bashfully sinking into her coat and smiling at her colleague, the lady simply shook her head and pointed once again to the message on her screen. This was agonizing. I knew beyond doubt that there would be a bus tomorrow. Unwavering online timetables had assured me of that. I was angry. I'd travelled for 8 hours into another freezing ghost town, and I was being told that I could not continue. Moreover, I'd just 8 days to travel more than 3,000 miles across some of China's most sensitive regions before my visa expires and I'm collared by the local cops. I went to the shop to buy some food supplies before returning as dusk fell and seeing the ticket seller walking home from the station. Please, I held my hands together. Langmusi, tomorrow. The lady shrugged her shoulders, smiled timidly, and continued on her way. Then, in a lucky moment, I was approached by a local lady who, seeing me wandering the town with my rucksacks, asked if I needed a place to stay. I followed her to a very basic guest house, perhaps the only one in town, and she showed me into the tiniest bedroom I've ever seen. It was the exact width and of a narrow single bed within, and there was just enough room to open the door at the foot of the bed. A window above the bedhead offered unrivaled views into the reception area, and a torn net curtain ensured that privacy was impossible. Yet at these temperatures, I wasn't for getting undressed. The guest house owner and her daughter beckoned me to join them for dinner. We shared rice and a hot vegetable stew, and I was encouraged to eat. Thoroughly stuffed, I turned beside the stove and watched a wintry storm blow in after nightfall. I rested with a hot cup of tea, ruminating over my next move, until the front door creaked open and a Tibetan nomad entered amid a flurry of snow. He brushed some snow from his shoulders, shivered a little, and blew into his hands. The nomad settled beside the stove, but did not lift his eyes. We each remained like so for half an hour or more, quiet and contemplative among the bitter harmony of winter's wind. Then the nomad raised his head and looked at me. I looked back and was surprised as he spoke in eloquent English. What brings you to the town of Zoj? I'm on my way to Langmusi, I said, but I'm having some difficulty. The ticket seller says there's no bus tomorrow. The nomad frowned. Of course, that's not the case. A bus leaves for Langmusi every morning at 7. So I believe. The nomad continued to frown. You know that there is a big festival tomorrow. It's Tibetan New Year, Losar. Hundreds of people will be going to the village of Langmusi to celebrate at the monasteries. I hope that you may see it. I nodded. Are you going to Langmusi too? No. I'm visiting home for the festive season. My village is not far from here. And where have you come from? The nomad paused and glanced at the stove. I work in New Delhi. New Delhi? It seemed a strange workplace for a Tibetan nomad. Yes, I've lived there for the last 10 years. You see, I work for the Free Tibet Press. I'm a journalist. However, we're not allowed to operate inside China. And now that I've come home, I'm under watch, he paused. So there are people following you? I don't know. But when I return to China, I must hand over my passport and call the police once a week to report my whereabouts. And what if you wish to return to New Delhi when you don't have a passport? Well, I must seek permission. Anytime I want to leave my village, I must seek permission. If they do not grant this, then I cannot go anywhere. It is a very difficult situation. Home is no longer feels like it did when I was young. There's too much tension, too much discord, and sometimes I feel like I'm imprisoned. Since I left home 10 years ago, many Chinese businesses have arrived in Tibet. This makes it much harder for Tibetan people to live well. My people must learn Mandarin, but the outsiders do not learn Tibetan. And sometimes our culture feels marginalized. I'm sad to tell you that life in Tibet is filled with turmoil. I considered the nomad's word before his voice returned in a different tone. So, you wish to go to Langmusi tomorrow? I nodded. Then meet me here at 6 a.m. and I will help you.
Wow, that is very well written, and I was captivated by the story. So did you get the bus in the morning?
Well, I did indeed. The nomad snuck off and bought me some tickets and smuggled me onto this local bus, and the blizzard continued to blow and snow swept across the road, and among me were all these other Tibetan nomads and monks, and they were praying in their seats and swinging prayer wheels and whooping and hollering, and we eventually made it up to this town. I again needed to hitch a ride with two monks, past two police checkpoints, and finally into village, where I have to say I experienced one of the most incredible and dumbfounding festivals and experiences I've ever had the pleasure of experiencing in my life.
Man, that is a book that has to be read. I want to get a copy of it myself. The Trail of the Mountain Folk.
That's the one, yeah.
So go to oliverfrance.com, and that might be a best way to get more information. You can click through there to order the book.
That would be awesome. Yeah, thank you very much, Kurt.
Very well written and amazing stories, man. It sounds like quite the trip, and I get it. Life-changing for sure. Life-changing for sure.
Absolutely.
Well, I want to remind the listeners out there, you also do public speaking.
I do indeed.
Is the best way to reach you in general, just to go to oliverfrance.com.
It absolutely is. On there, I've got some various little travel stories. You can purchase my book. I've got some videos of my travels. In fact, a 6-minute video which covers this entire journey across Asia and is a really good taster of my trip. I've also got photography and links to how you can arrange any public speaking events. Absolutely, that's the place to go, oliverfrance.com.
Well, Ollie, you've certainly given me the itch to travel more. I've got to do it. Wow.
Awesome.
What an amazing life experience. Thank you so much for coming on the Adventure Sports Podcast today and sharing that with us.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I've thoroughly enjoyed speaking to you today.
Oh, yeah, it's our honor. And hey, all the listeners out there, wow, right? Until the next show, I'm not just going to say get out there and have some fun. I'm going to say plan something big. Make that a part of who you are and get out there and have some fun.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for listening to this episode. It really means the world to us that you want to spend your time with us. If you'd like to help us further, please just leave us a review on iTunes, share us on social media, tell your friends about us. You can become a patron, a supporter of the show for $5 a month at patreon.com/adventuresportspodcast. And if you know somebody that would make a good guest, reach out. We're always looking for good adventure and outdoor stories. And lastly, thank you to our sponsors, whose messages follow right now. Athletic Brewing makes the best non-alcoholic craft beer. Go to their website at athleticbrewing.com and use the code in our show notes to save 15% on your first order. After all this adventure talk, if you're needing some gear yourself, but you need some advice before buying, go to backpacktribe.com, where you can ask questions to the owners who have experience with all the gear, as well as all of it for sale right there on their website.